It began with a spill that no one cared to stop. Red wine crawled across a white tablecloth, staining the evening's perfection. Vivian's smile faltered, then hardened. Anna reached down, collecting glass in shaking hands. No one moved to help. At the corner table, the man in gray, calm, almost invisible, watched, his gaze unreadable beneath the brim of his cap. A small notebook rested beside his untouched drink. He wrote one word and closed it. The room returned to laughter, but the air had shifted, thin, brittle, false. No one knew the man watching owned everything they stood on, and no one yet understood that this dinner, polished and rehearsed, had just become the beginning of reckoning. Morning light slid across the empty dining room, cool and clinical. Harlan tied a plain apron around his waist, the fabric still stiff from storage. His name tag read only Har, the rest smudged by time. He moved without hesitation, collecting spoons with faint lipstick stains aligning them like quiet truths. Mark introduced him to the staff with a tone too casual to hide suspicion, his gaze scanning for weakness. Harlan met it with the calm of someone who already knew how storms formed. Anna glanced up once from polishing glasses. Recognition flickered, not of identity but of presence. He offered a small nod and kept working. When no one watched, he opened his small notebook to a clean page. The first line stood alone. Observe, never judge. The disguise was not fabric, it was restraint. In silence, he entered their world, not to expose them, but to understand. Mark's smile gleamed under the lights, perfect for customers and photographs. The moment the door swung shut, it hardened into command. His voice dropped to a temperature that left fingerprints on the air. He corrected Anna's clock-in sheet by 2 minutes, confiscated a locker key, recalculated the shared tips as though fairness were flexible. The staff moved around him like trained ghosts, each trying not to exist too loudly. Harlan watched the performance unfold, two faces trading places with the turn of a wrist. In his notebook, he drew 2 columns, front and back. The first held gestures of charm, the second small violences too common to notice. Mark laughed again at a departing guest, and Harlan marked another line. The duality fascinated him, how civility could bruise more cleanly than cruelty when delivered with a smile. By noon, the sink water had turned the color of fatigue. Anna's fingers were wrapped in thin tape, the skin split from detergent and heat. A scribbled note near her register listed doses of medicine for her mother, numbers circled, rewritten, fading. Her lunch sat untouched, rice hardened at the edges. When a new hire arrived late, Anna slid her own slice of bread onto his plate without a word. Harlan noticed the motion, the instinct to give, even when empty. After the shift, when the staff dispersed, he placed a small pack of cotton and antiseptic in her locker. No note, no signature. Just care left in silence. The next day, her hands were wrapped neatly white against the gray of her uniform. In those hands, cracked and gentle, Harlan saw everything the company had forgotten, work that bled quietly and dignity that refused to die. At night, when the chatter drained from Silver Oak and only the hum of refrigerators remained, Harlan sat in the back corner with his notebook open. Each page was ruled with clean lines, ink steady and unemotional. He listed hours, worked words, spoken tips, missing. Beside every name, a small mark, a plus for kindness, a minus for exploitation. The columns grew quietly. Anna, +2, Mark, 3, Sloan, +1. He didn't rush or moralize, he measured. The notebook became a silent witness, its weight heavier than any policy manual. Under the lamp's thin glow, the final line settled on the page, "Justice requires evidence." He closed the cover, fingertips resting on the worn leather. No speeches, no confrontation, just order emerging from chaos, one line at a time. In a place built on noise and vanity, the soft scratch of his pen was the only honest sound left. The next morning, Sloan leaned close to Harlan at the prep counter, voice barely surfacing above the hiss of oil. Tips were vanishing again. The schedule board favored the same names, friends of Mark men who never stayed till close. Anna's coffee had been swapped for a larger cup she hadn't ordered, the price quietly docked from her pay. Mark laughed off another mistaken receipt, promising to fix it later, the word later already hollow. Harlan didn't respond. He only watched how patterns formed when no one resisted. Small inequities linked like chainmail, each harmless alone, unbreakable together. He noted the exchanges in his mind, the way fear bent backs faster than exhaustion. The injustice wasn't loud. It whispered through procedures, forms, receipts. It thrived in politeness. When Sloane wiped her hands and walked away, Harlan's jaw tightened not in anger, but in understanding how power hid best in habit. Steam blurred the metal fixtures until they looked like ghosts of their own reflections. Marlowe stood hunched over the sink arm, submerged in gray water that never cooled. His glasses fogged, his shoulders trembled beneath the weight of endless trays. Mark passed by, dropped another rack without a word, and left the door swinging behind him. Harlan stepped forward, rolling his sleeves. "Take 10, he murmured, already sliding on gloves. Marlowe hesitated, then nodded, once the kind of nod that carries both gratitude and disbelief. For 10 quiet minutes, Harlan scrubbed in his place, feeling the heat claw at his wrists. When Marlowe returned, eyes damp, the rhythm of the kitchen had changed not much, just enough. Kindness had entered unnoticed, like cool air through a crack in the wall. It wasn't charity, it was calibration, a small correction inside a machine that had forgotten how mercy felt. Mark's hand cut through the air before his voice did. His index finger, long and rigid, pointed across the dining room like a blade searching for flesh. Anna froze where she stood, tray balanced in both hands, her breath caught in the silence that followed. Customers turned, drawn by the spectacle faces. Half curious, half relieved, it wasn't them. The pointing didn't end. It lingered, a gesture meant to carve humiliation into memory. Behind a potted fern, Harlan observed the ritual unfold, the line between discipline and cruelty erased by repetition. On the table nearby lay a folded napkin, neat and square. Anna's fingers crushed its edges until the folds broke. The sound of silverware clinking returned, and conversation resumed as though nothing had happened. But the air stayed sliced open. Mark's finger dropped, his smile reattached, and the hierarchy stood, reset, its violence disinfected by etiquette. In the kitchen, metal sang a harsher tune. Beckett stood over the grill, his tongs snapped in half-meat burning on one side. The heat pressed against him like a hand that never lifted. Mark appeared just long enough to scold, his words sharp enough to blister. No one spoke. Harlan stepped forward, replacing the broken tool with a spare from the storage rack. No gesture of heroism, just quiet correction. Beckett blinked through the sweat, nodded once, and the rhythm resumed. The head chef caught the exchange and returned the nod to Harlan, brief but sincere, a language older than policy. The kitchen exhaled. Kindness here had to move quickly, disguised as efficiency hidden beneath the noise of orders and steam. The grill hissed again, this time steadier. The lesson wasn't in what was said, but in what functioned once empathy slipped silently into the machinery of work. By evening, the air in the kitchen felt like punishment. Harlan's notebook rested beside a timer, its pages filled not with words but with numbers, temperatures, shifts, errors. The heat rose past safe limits. The pace climbed with it. He marked where exhaustion began, where mistakes multiplied. Every statistic pulsed with the heartbeat of the people behind it. Energy breakpoints he wrote in the margin. Data became confession. The pattern was clear overwork disguised as discipline. Beneath the numbers a note formed, train, then rest. When the timer buzzed, he closed the book, sliding it into his apron. His analysis wasn't detached. It carried the warmth of understanding. Systems failed because people did, and people broke where compassion was replaced by metrics. He left the kitchen, the scent of heat clinging to him, knowing that numbers could expose cruelty just as sharply as any confrontation ever could. Rumor moved faster than service trays. Vivian was coming for lunch. By 10, the staff whispered her name like weather news. Mark paced near the counter, rehearsing politeness in the mirror of a silver tray. Smile, first hands. Second, he reminded them, meaning, obey before you breathe. Harlan wiped down a table by the window, slow and deliberate, his cloth tracing circles that caught the sun. Through the glass, a shape appeared. Vivian stepping out of a black car, hair pulled into perfection, her diamond ring catching a shard of daylight. The reflection sliced across Harlan's arm, cold and precise, a reminder of two lives that should never meet, but inevitably would. Around him, tension thickened. Conversations shrank into silence. The room prepared itself for performance, unaware it was about to host a collision of appearances. The light on the glass lingered long after she passed, like an omen left to wait its turn. Toby moved through the dining room like electricity, young, restless, quick to burn. A double order flashed on the screen, the kind of mistake that needed a scapegoat. Mark didn't hesitate. "Your fault," he snapped, not looking up. The words stuck like grease on Toby's hands. He clenched the tray tighter, eyes sharpening under fluorescent light. The rhythm of the shift stumbled. A customer called out, impatient. Toby turned too fast, nearly colliding with another waiter. Harlan reached out just in time, pulling him aside before plates crashed. For a moment, Toby's anger met Harlan's calm. Then he exhaled, jaw-locked, gaze darting toward the VIP corner. The rage stayed there, folded, but not gone, a spark trapped under wet cloth. Harlan recognized it, the dangerous kind of fire that came from being unseen. He watched as Toby returned to work, his movements precise, every step a warning of the storm still waiting to ignite. Later that evening, when Anna stepped away from her station, a small note slipped from her apron pocket. Harlan caught it before it touched the floor. The handwriting was neat but weary. Small cafe, 8 tables, chicken soup on Sundays. Numbers filled the margins, costs margins, calculations of hope. Behind her phone case, he glimpsed a faded photo of an older woman smiling from a porch, her mother, no doubt. The dream was modest, but the care in its details made it enormous. He placed the note back exactly as it was, no crease out of place. In his own notebook, he wrote a single line, "Some dreams deserve to live, even if the world forgets them." When Anna returned unaware of his small discovery, she hummed softly while wiping glasses. Harlan watched her reflection in the mirror behind the bar, someone still building light in a room that refused to brighten. The rule sheet hung beside the kitchen clock, creased, yellowed, unsigned. Mark had written it himself, typed in neat columns with no names at the bottom to claim authorship. The punishments were vague. Repeated errors may result in deduction. The rewards, conveniently, were delayed. Bonuses will be reviewed at the manager's discretion. Every word disguised control as structure. Harlan studied the document like a blueprint of quiet exploitation. He compared shift logs, cross-checked payslips, counted the hours that dissolved between the lines. The math didn't lie. Mark had turned paperwork into a tool sharper than discipline. The paper's edge curled from being reprinted too often, the date re-stamped without revision. Order had become theater fairness, a rumor. Harlan folded the sheet and slid it back into place, his fingers lingering on its brittle surface. In a world that praised efficiency, the system's cruelty was written cleanly enough to look professional. Keaton moved like a whisper through the dining room, adjusting bottles without sound. He noticed the stuck wine valve before anyone else and glanced toward Harlan, who was refilling glasses near the wall. A slight tilt of his chin pointed to the problem. Harlan stepped forward, loosened the joint with a single twist, and stepped back. The act took 3 seconds. No one watching would have called it teamwork. But Keaton looked up, meeting Harlan's eyes across the polished counter, and gave the smallest nod, gratitude compressed into motion. It was an alliance made without words, built in the shared space between competence and dignity. Both men understood that survival here meant precision, never speak more than necessary, never draw attention to decency. When the last guest left, Keaton walked past and muttered, "Smooth." Harlan smiled faintly. In a place full of noise, respect still found a way to speak quietly. That night, Harlan redrew the columns in his notebook. The first labeled name, the second moral weight. He wasn't judging, he was measuring gravity. Mark 3 already sinking. Vivian, 2, her influence distant but inevitable. Anna, +4, rising even under strain. Toby, +1, a flicker of potential and danger. Keaton, +1, quiet integrity. Each number felt less like scorekeeping and more like physics and invisible pull-shaping behavior, one choice tugging at another. In the margin, he wrote, "Morality spreads like temperature." The idea fascinated him how decency could warm a room, how cruelty cooled it to glass. He closed the book slowly, thinking not of punishment, but balance. Systems collapse when their moral weight shifts too far in one direction. His task wasn't vengeance, it was correction. As he slipped the notebook into his apron, the restaurant's lights dimmed to closing hour, the scales of humanity recalibrating in silence. By closing time, the lights softened, shedding their harsh white for a muted gold that made every surface look older, more forgiving. Harlan stayed behind, scrubbing the dark wine stain from a corner table. The mark had been there since that first night, a faint ghost of humiliation that refused to fade. Beside him, Anna pressed a dry towel against her cracked palms, the motion slow, careful. She caught his glance and almost smiled, the kind of silent gratitude that doesn't need a sound. Around them, the restaurant exhaled. Chairs turned upside down, the smell of soap and burnt oil mixing with something gentler resilience. Through the window, the name Silver Oak glowed in the glass, its silver letters cold, untouchable. Harlan paused, staring at their reflection side by side, two workers, two worlds bound by fatigue, and something quieter. The night felt like a held breath, a reset before the storm waiting beneath tomorrow's calm. The following day cracked open like glass under heat. The VIP table, all suits and entitlement, sent back their plates untouched. Mark arrived instantly, voice sweetened for the guests but sharpened for the staff. "Anna, that's on you," he said without proof or hesitation. The order cancellation appeared on the log, yet the cost still deducted from her shift. The customers smiled, thin, amused, complicit. Anna's face didn't change, only her shoulders tensed like a rope pulled too tight. From the edge of the dining room, Harlan watched, half in light, half in shadow. He could see both worlds clearly now, one basking under chandeliers, the other surviving under them. The moral line of the room ran exactly through where he stood. The laughter resumed. The moment was forgotten. But for Harlan, it marked the beginning. The line had been crossed, and he was done pretending it hadn't. Later in the break room, the new draft of payroll waited on the bulletin board, red-inked and unapologetic. Anna's pay was trimmed again, reason unspecified. Mark's initials signed beneath the column, neat as a seal. She hesitated, then signed anyway, fear disguised as compliance. Her pen barely left a mark, as if signing too boldly might invite worse. Harlan stood behind her, the question already in his eyes. She shook her head, once soft but certain. "Don't." The silence between them was heavier than anger. He opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "Fear functions best when it looks voluntary." The fluorescent light hummed above, washing their faces pale. Anna walked away, holding the paper as though it burned. The system didn't need chains, it only needed agreement. Harlan watched her leave and realized control here wasn't enforced. It was consented to, one signature at a time. The kitchen roared like a furnace at full breath. Every metal surface glowed faintly, as if anger had found a temperature. Beckett's hands were wrapped in thin plastic gloves that did little against the heat. When he reached for the skillet, a hiss rose, skin met steel, a small blister blooming instantly. Mark didn't slow. He barked orders faster, pushing the rhythm beyond human pace. Plates clattered out like ammunition speed over precision. The faster they worked, the more errors surfaced, the louder he demanded perfection. Harlan watched the cycle devour itself, too much velocity, too little mercy. 3 minutes break, he suggested, his tone measured. Mark waved him off without turning. The air grew thicker, heavy with burnt oil and pride. Somewhere behind the smoke, the truth revealed itself. This wasn't productivity, It was punishment disguised as efficiency. Systems built on exhaustion don't collapse from outside pressure. They implode from within. The kitchen had begun to crack. Midday light cut across the dining room, bouncing off glass tables polished to a mirror. The reflection caught the eyes of customers' faces, doubled, distorted, hovering above their meals. Anna carried a tray loaded with wine glasses, each trembling slightly in the shimmer. A single drop of condensation slid, threatening the balance. Mark's voice snapped across the room, finger pointed, ready to humiliate. Before disaster struck, Harlan stepped forward, quietly positioning himself beside the table's edge. The tray steadied against his arm, invisible to everyone but her. The glasses stopped shaking. Anna exhaled so lightly it never reached sound. He shifted back into shadow before Mark turned. The room resumed its chatter, unaware it had nearly witnessed failure. Harlan wiped the table once, restoring its flawless reflection. No one saw what had happened, yet something had shifted. The difference between collapse and grace often existed in moments too small to remember. The scent arrived before she did, sharp, icy, deliberate. Vivian entered with 3 friends, their laughter polished to match the metallic sheen of her dress. Light scattered off sequins, drawing every gaze without effort. Keaton looked away, first his professional restraint practiced and precise. Mark nearly bowed as he greeted her, his tone honeyed, servile. The staff straightened their posture. Service became performance. From across the room, Harlan stepped back into the darker corner near the bar. Through the shimmer of the dining floor, he watched her glide toward the same seat she had once claimed like a throne. The two worlds overlapped now, his disguise and her illusion, both built on silence. Her diamond caught the chandelier light, throwing fragments across the wall, each one sharp enough to cut memory. Harlan stayed still, the reflection of her ring glancing across his chest. In that moment, the air thickened with the weight of recognition, unspoken but inevitable. It began the same way the first had. A bead of red wine trembled at the rim, then slid down in a slow, deliberate fall. It struck the lace edge of Vivian's metallic dress, a tiny wound blooming in silk. She didn't flinch. She only lifted her eyes, a faint smirk curling at one side as if destiny itself had repeated for her amusement. Anna froze, napkin in hand, voice low but steady. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she managed before Mark's bark cut through the room. "Careless, always careless." The sentence hit harder than the spill. Conversations died mid-sentence. Forks paused in mid-air. Harlan felt the moment collapse into déjà vu, a cruel ritual disguised as accident. The first time had been coincidence. This time was ceremony. Vivian's smirk didn't fade, but her eyes flicked past Anna, grazing the dim corner where Harlan stood unseen. The wine crept wider across the fabric, darkening like proof that humiliation once performed always finds its encore. The aftermath was quieter but more dangerous. Vivian's voice carried softly, each word clean, precise, lethal. "People like you belong with a mop, not a tray." The sentence landed without volume, yet the room contracted around it. Anna's face didn't move. Her muscles simply locked into stillness. Keaton at the nearby cart stopped mid-pour, his hand gripping the stem of a glass until it trembled. Mark smiled, faintly complicit. No one laughed, though a few guests lowered their eyes, pretending fascination with their plates. Harlan opened his notebook beneath the counter and wrote, "Language the cheapest weapon ever made." He didn't look up. The words had already done their damage, invisible but cutting. The air shimmered with unease like the moment before lightning. No physical violence had been done, yet something essential had been severed. Vivian leaned back, satisfied, unaware that cruelty spoken too often eventually carves the speaker deeper than the target. The tension snapped in the smallest of ways. A shoulder brushed the wrong direction. Toby, carrying a loaded tray, accidentally grazed a guest's suit jacket. The man muttered under his breath. Mark pounced instantly. His hand clamped on Toby's collar, voice slicing through the dining room. "Apologize." The tray wobbled, wine sloshed. Anna stepped forward, reaching to intervene, her eyes pleading for restraint. Harlan took a single step, then stopped halfway. The line between exposure and control was a knife's edge, and he balanced on it. Toby's jaw trembled, rage and shame fighting beneath his skin. For a second, everyone froze the staff. The guests, even the chandeliers, seemed to hold their breath. Then Toby muttered an apology, low and bitter. Mark released him with a smirk. The order resumed, but the room was no longer the same. Sparks had entered the air, invisible yet alive. Harlan knew one more touch and the entire system would ignite. The moment came without warning, just emotion, sudden and absolute. Mark's hand rose and connected with Toby's face, the sound swallowed by shock. Silence followed, sharp and absolute. Only the red mark bloomed, slow and undeniable, spreading across Toby's cheek like truth refusing to stay hidden. The tray fell, metal striking marble silver, catching light in a brief flash before scattering across the floor. Anna gasped, reaching forward, her balance faltering. The room didn't breathe. Every guest stared, paralyzed between judgment and voyeurism. Mark adjusted his sleeve as if swatting dust, pretending it hadn't happened. Harlan, at the edge of the scene, placed his cleaning cloth on the nearest table, carefully, deliberately, as if setting down the final illusion of neutrality. The air felt fractured, a perfect room, now split by one forbidden act, visible violence. What had been whispered through policy and tone had now arrived in flesh. The mask of civility had cracked. Glass glittered like ice on the floor, each fragment catching light before cutting skin. Anna reached to gather the pieces, and one lodged deep into her palm. A thin line of blood curved across her hand, elegant, defiant, unbearably human. Vivian watched from her chair, eyes bright with a cruel sort of fascination, the way one might observe a stage tragedy they'd paid to attend. Keaton moved first, tearing a linen napkin and pressing it to her wound, his silence a protest louder than words. Harlan's jaw tightened, his fingers curled around the edge of his apron until the fabric strained. The smell of wine and iron mingled, impossible to separate. The room remained frozen. No apology, no consequence. Only the sight of that red line, too fine to ignore, too small to justify outrage. It was the first real blood drawn not from accident, but from the weight of what the system demanded. Mark's composure returned quickly, arrogance sliding back over shame like a fresh coat of polish. "You're done here," he hissed, finger pointed at Anna. The staff recoiled, shoulders folding inward. Vivian folded her arms, satisfaction painted across her face, a queen presiding over a ruin she mistook for order. Anna stood straighter, the pain in her hand hidden behind the napkin, her voice silent, but her presence firm. For the first time, she didn't flinch. The tension thickened until even light felt heavy. From the corner, Harlan's hand lifted, fingers brushing the brim of his cap, a reflex small but decisive. The gesture trembled with the weight of revelation waiting to happen. The room didn't yet know it, but balance had already begun to shift. The air between them burned with something electric the moment before truth announces itself, the breath held between exposure and justice. One movement more, and the disguise would end. The room stopped breathing the moment Harlan reached for his cap. His fingers brushed the brim slowly, as if testing the weight of what came next. Then he lifted it away. The motion was simple, almost ordinary, but it broke something invisible. The noise of plates, the whispers, even the hum of the lights all dimmed into silence. The space seemed to shrink, pulling everyone closer to the gravity of that gesture. Vivian froze mid-gesture, her lips parting without sound. Mark stepped back half a pace, confusion flickering into fear. Anna, standing closest, frowned, still caught between recognition and disbelief. The disguise dissolved not through revelation, but through calm certainty. Harlan's bare head caught the dull glow of the chandeliers, no longer the servant in the corner, but the center of every gaze. He didn't need to announce himself. The stillness did it for him. In that breath, truth replaced performance. Keaton was the first to whisper it. Harlan. The word barely left his mouth, yet it rippled across the room like a dropped coin in water. Conversations died mid-sentence. The guests at the VIP table stiffened, eyes darting toward the man who no longer wore a uniform. Vivian's tongue touched dry lips. Her diamond ring seemed to lose its shine. Mark scanned the exits, already rehearsing denial. But Harlan didn't move. He stood, rooted steady, his stillness heavier than any shout. Every gaze collided with his and faltered. His name carried its own architecture, CEO, owner, builder, and now it pressed down on the room, rearranging its balance. Even the air seemed to bend, weighted with recognition. Harlan's silence held more power than Mark's authority ever had. In the echo of his name, the hierarchy inverted. Control returned to the man who had never needed to raise his voice to claim it. When Harlan finally spoke, his voice was level, stripped of fury. This place was meant for opportunity, he said, each word a clean incision. For respect, not fear. The sentences landed without haste, heavy as stones placed with intention. No guards, no threats, only truth delivered in full view. He didn't look at Mark when he spoke of responsibility, nor at Vivian when he said dignity. Instead, his eyes moved across every face, giving each person the chance to confront themselves. No one could meet his gaze for long. The weight of silence between his phrases did the rest, forcing reflection sharper than punishment. The sound of distant cutlery began again, timid, embarrassed. Harlan closed his notebook, leaving it on the counter, a record and a mirror. In those few measured words, he dismantled years of pretense. Power, reclaimed quietly, became its own kind of reckoning. Harlan placed the small notebook on the nearest table and opened it to a page marked by precision. Each line was dated, every entry cross-checked, hours worked, tips, withheld, fines invented. He read them aloud, not as accusation, but as fact. The numbers alone dismantled Mark faster than anger ever could. When he tried to interject, his voice collapsed under the weight of documentation. Keaton nodded, once confirming a figure. Anna's eyes widened. The truth she had felt now existed in ink. Around them, the guests fell quiet, the performance of wealth disarmed by evidence. Vivian lowered her gaze, her reflection trembling in her untouched glass of wine. The entire room turned into a courtroom without judge or jury, only consequence. Harlan didn't raise his tone. Proof was louder. By the time he closed the notebook, the silence itself had rendered its verdict. Facts, clean and unflinching, had done what morality alone could not, made denial impossible. The aftermath unfolded with surgical calm. Mark Harlan said, "You're relieved of your position effective immediately." The words carried no malice, just precision. Mark's shoulders sagged, his authority dissolving faster than he could find it. Harlan turned to Keaton. "Until restructuring is complete, you'll oversee daily operations." A murmur of surprise rippled through the staff, followed by quiet approval. The next instructions came clear and swift, transparent tip distribution, elimination of arbitrary fines, retraining sessions scheduled within the week. Each change fell like a domino, neat and irreversible. The old hierarchy, once armored by fear, collapsed under clarity. No yelling, no theatrics, just restoration. Harlan's tone made reform sound like maintenance, as if decency were the system's natural state all along. When he finished, the room didn't cheer. It simply exhaled the collective relief of people realizing they no longer had to flinch to be heard. Then he turned to Anna. Her hand was still wrapped in the linen Keaton had tied. "You'll take over as operations manager," Harlan said evenly. "Training will be covered. So will your mother's treatment." The words landed gently, as if he were placing something fragile back into rightful hands. Anna blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Around her, the staff froze, not out of envy but respect. Harlan outlined the terms probationary period, full transparency, measurable growth. Nothing hidden, nothing gifted, earned, recognized. Anna straightened, the first full breath she'd taken in days rising in her chest. Her eyes shone not with tears, but with steadiness. Vivian looked away, the reflection of that dignity too bright to bear. The promotion wasn't a reward, it was a correction. For the first time, justice didn't feel loud, it felt balanced. And in the hush that followed, Harlan's expression softened. The company at last looked human again. Vivian lingered by the glass door after the crowd had thinned her reflection framed between the words Silver Oak fading in the evening light. For the first time, she studied herself without the armor of poise. The woman, staring back, looked older, not from years, but from distance, too many moments spent looking down at others instead of inward. The diamond on her hand, once radiant, now caught no light. It sat cold, indifferent, reflecting only the sharpness of regret. She didn't reach for her phone or adjust her hair. She simply watched her own stillness. Behind her, Anna gave quiet instructions to the staff voice, steady, unafraid. Vivian's lips parted, but no apology came, just a single nod in Anna's direction, small and clean acknowledgement stripped of vanity. The reflection trembled once under the changing light, then steadied. In that fragile symmetry, Vivian saw not condemnation, but the beginning of consequence. The old sign came down at dawn. By afternoon, a new one shimmered under the soft light, the silent connection letters of brushed silver catching warmth instead of glare. The air inside felt different, lighter, but still grounded. The staff, lined up by the entrance uniforms, pressed eyes clear. Keaton adjusted his tie until it sat perfectly centered, a small ritual of respect. Harlan stood among them, no longer undercover, just present. Anna stepped forward, first unlocking the door, her motion deliberate, graceful, sure. Sunlight slipped in, spilling across polished floors that once felt like a stage. Now they looked like home. Outside, the city moved indifferently, but within these walls, something had reset, the kind of silence that doesn't signal emptiness but peace earned through repair. A place reborn not through renovation but through the quiet agreement to be better than before. Later that week, a wooden board hung near the entrance. Across its center, in black ink still wet, one word, "Welcome." Around it, the staff signed their names carefully along the edges, laughter soft and real. Each signature curved differently. Toby's trembled slightly but stayed straight. Keaton's was neat and elegant. Sloane's quick and confident. When Anna took the pen, she didn't pause. Her handwriting pressed firmly into the grain, the ink soaking deep. It wasn't ceremony, it was proof. Harlan watched from the side, recognizing the weight of what they were building, belonging without condition. The sign would dry overnight, permanent yet imperfect, a record of those who stayed and tried again. No speeches followed, no applause. Just the creak of the door as the first guest entered and the faint scent of fresh ink, a quiet reminder that some welcomes are written, not said. Vivian arrived alone, her heels quiet against the tile. In her hands a bouquet of white lilies, pure, restrained, almost apologetic. She didn't ask for attention, didn't demand forgiveness. She simply placed the flowers on the counter, careful not to disturb the papers beneath. The air between her and Anna held the tension of unspoken things. Anna looked up steady and composed, offering a small nod acknowledgement without invitation. No words followed. The silence between them carried more weight than any apology could. Vivian lingered just long enough to breathe, once then turned toward the door. The flowers stayed behind their petals, opening slowly in the afternoon light, a quiet offering to the space she had once poisoned. Redemption, it seemed, didn't always need witnesses, only sincerity. Harlan stood outside, separated by the glass that reflected both the street and the life inside. The afternoon sun divided his reflection in half light and shadow, sharing the same outline. Inside, the staff moved easily, laughter subdued but genuine. Anna leaned against the counter, a cup of coffee in her hand, steam curling into the air. On the table near her, Harlan's notebook lay closed, its purpose complete. He watched without longing, just quiet satisfaction. The world inside no longer needed him to correct it. That was the point. He adjusted his cap, the old disguise now just habit, and stepped back from the window. Behind the glass, the laughter continued, faint but steady proof that what he'd built could stand on its own. Harlan put his cap back on and stepped into the light. Behind him, the glass door caught his reflection, one word hovering above it. Welcome. Inside, Anna pointed to the new training board, her voice confident, her purpose clear. He didn't need to enter. The system now worked on its own, powered not by fear, but fairness. As he walked away, the sunlight deepened gold against the pavement. In his mind, one truth settled like a final note. Kindness doesn't need to be heard, it only needs to be felt. That's how real change begins, quietly, permanently in the hearts that stay behind.